Hello guys. So if you are watching this video, you need to have already watched the lesson called Liberty and Social Contract, lesson number 1. So this is the second lesson. In the first lesson, as you recall, we went over how to look up and find where a quote was, who said it, how to do all that with Google. And we talked about how to summarize. And if you look, you'll remember this from the other lesson. This was the Magna Carta. This was the summary. No witness, no crime. The government can't take your stuff. And I wanted you to go through in lesson 1 and look at those other ones, look up who and when, and come up with your own summary for what people were saying. So this video is basically a chance for you to check your answers. So if you have not gone through those other mystery documents and figured out who said it and what they're about, I want you to go do that right now and then come back to this video. Okay, if you're still with me, I'm assuming you've already done that, and this is basically us going through and checking your answers. So we're going to go ahead and do that. The first slide said this: all men are naturally born in a state of perfect freedom, equal and independent, to act how they want to. The state of nature has a law that governs it. This law of nature obliges that no one should harm another in his natural right to life, liberty, and property. To maintain this natural state of freedom, equality, and independence, men consent to join and unite in a community for a comfortable, peaceful living and a greater security against any others that might desire to take away or harm their natural rights. When every individual in a community has consented to join together, they have made that community a government. Because men consent to enter into society to preserve their natural rights to life, liberty, and property, whenever the government endeavors to take away or destroy the life, liberty, or property of the people, the government puts itself in a state of war with the people, and the people are released from any further obedience to the government. So I'm going to change my cursor right quick, which is going to be a little bit of a distraction here. Oh, where's my cursor thing at? Well, that wasn't it. Help if I'd hit the right button, right? Okay, so let's talk about this quote. Okay, it was made by John Locke. So he's English. He makes this quote in 1689, in a book called his Second Treatise of Government. And now I want to talk a little bit about the summary. This first part says there are natural rights. Okay, if they come from nature, that means no one can take them away. You are born and you should expect life, liberty, which is freedom, and property. Okay? This next part says that people consent, which means they agree to unite together into a community. Now, a community is just another word for a social contract. So if people give their consent to form a community, or down here it says a government, then they have made a social contract. And that government's job is to protect your natural rights, which are life, liberty, and property. And this last part says, anytime you've given your consent, you've agreed to do that, and you're not having your life, your liberty, your property protected. So if I'm losing my life, if I'm dying or being injured, if I'm losing my freedom, or my property is being taken away, then my government has broken the social contract. They broke the contract, and I can leave. I can pick a new government. I can walk away. That's going to be really important. This idea of how if the government fails you, you can walk away has a lot to do that we think of as good when we talk about we're going to break away from England. But later on, when the South leaves the Union in the Civil War, they're going to come right back to this and say, hey, John Locke, you failed to protect our property, and then in this case they would mean slaves. You failed to protect our liberty because we were taking away their freedom to have slavery. So we get to walk away from this government. And that's going to be using the same philosophy in a way most of us in America don't like. So just something to think about. Let's move on to the next one. Nature has made men so equal in with regards to the body and mind that the differences from one man to another is not so considerable. From this equality of ability comes an equality of hope in attaining our goals and desires. If any two men desire the same thing which they cannot both enjoy, they compete, and they become enemies. When this happens, if there is no common power to keep them all in awe, they will engage in a condition which is called war. In such conditions, there is no place for business or prosperity. So think about that, prosperity and business. We're talking about what John Locke called property. As a result of this, culture goes away and knowledge is lost. There are no arts, no letters, and no society in times of war. Society is just another word for a social contract. Worst of all, there is continual fear and danger of violent death. So John Locke would have said that's your natural right to life. The life of man is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. If I'm just going to summarize all of that, it would be this. People suck. People are bad. Okay, now this last little part. In order to live a more contented life and escape the miserable condition of war, men must give up their freedom to the state. The power of the state must be absolute in order to keep men in awe and tie them by fear of punishment to the performance of their covenants with one another. Now, this performance of their covenants with one another, that's just another term for a social contract. We're going to keep the promises we make to each other, just like they made those promises to each other in the Mayflower Compact. So this is a social contract. So even though John Locke basically thinks men are good and are going to choose to do good things, and Thomas Hobbes here, I know we haven't said who it is, but that's who it is. He says that people are bad and are going to mostly do bad things. They both end up at the same place, that we need to have a social contract to keep the peace. So Thomas Hobbes wrote this in Leviathan. It was published in 1651, and he made these observations right after being in the English Civil War. So he's just watched a lot of really bad stuff happen. Those are our two English examples. Now we have a couple more, and they're going to come from France. In every government, there are three kinds of power. There are the legislative, the executive, and the judicial powers. The power of the first, the legislative, is to create laws and amend those laws that have already been created. The power of the second is to maintain public security by enforcing the laws. The power of the third, judicial, is to punish criminals and settle the disputes that arise between individuals. There would be no freedom if the same man or same group of men controlled those three powers at once. This man or group of men would have complete control over all parts of the law. They could create tyrannical laws or enforce them like a tyrant. They could plunder the country. When he talks about plundering the country, he means they could take away your property by their general determinations and could ruin any private citizen by their particular decisions. This is why many of the kings and princes of Europe, whose goal has been to obtain absolute power, have tried to unite in themselves all branches of the government. I think basically, let's see who it is first. So this is Charles de Montesquieu, and he wrote this in The Spirit of Laws in 1777. That's actually the wrong date. Okay, that got written in 1762, I believe. So sorry about that. This is just before our revolution. And he's saying you need to separate power, and that will protect the people. But it also protects the government, because if the government had all the power, then they would likely cause trouble for themselves. They would likely go too far. So having the government separated into these three separate branches protects the people, protects our natural rights, as John Locke would say, and it also protects the government from itself. All right? Next one here. Oh, how I love this one. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. This is because man has given up his freedom to many masters in order to preserve his life. So there's that idea of life, a natural right. This primitive condition can subsist no longer. The problem now is to find a form of government which will defend and protect the life of good the life and goods is property, so we're back to John Locke there, of each member, while still allowing each member to obey himself alone and thus remain as free as before. Maintaining your freedom, that's liberty. So again, all these other guys keep hearkening back to John Locke. The social contract provides the solution to this fundamental problem. The masses must unite together. This union of all people together is called the general will. Each person must put himself and all his power under the common control of the general will, and must obey whatever the general will decides. Each member has the same power and is thus equally important part of the whole. Through this social contract, man maintains as many of the freedoms he got from nature as possible. Each man, in giving his freedom to all, gives his freedom to no one. This is because there is no one over whom he does not acquire the same power he is given. Lots in here about the social contract, and it's used to protect freedom. Okay? They say you voluntarily commit to an organization, to a government, to protect those freedoms. Now, one thing that's different about this one, and let's just put up who it is. So this is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau, and this is in 1762. Rousseau believes, when he talks about the general will here, that most of the people are going to choose the right thing most of the time. Now, Thomas Hobbes would never believe that. But this is more based on John Locke. So he believes, hey, if 51% of the people in a group decide they want to do something, then everybody should do that because it's likely to be the best thing. Thomas Hobbes would say no way, because 51% of the people might decide to kill off the other 49%. And then what kind of world is that? So this idea of democracy, of having a vote, of following the majority, is central to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and it all harkens back to John Locke. But when we form our government and we have our Bill of Rights, we have things in our Constitution that you can't vote on, they're just inherent there, like your freedom of the press or right to bear arms or freedom from excessive fines, those kinds of things. That's because of Thomas Hobbes. So these French philosophers are drawing from both of those earlier English philosophers. Now we're going to do a couple American philosophers, and then we'll be done with this part of the lesson. But where, say some, is the King of America? I'll tell you, friend, he reigns above and doth make havoc of mankind, and doth not make havoc of mankind, like the royal brute of Britain. So he's making fun of the king right there. Yet that we may not appear to be defective, even in earthly honors, let a day be solemnly set apart for proclaiming the charter. A charter is an agreement. A charter is a social contract. Let it be brought forth, placed on the divine law, the word of God. Let a crown be placed thereon, by which the world may know that so far as we approve of monarchy, that in America the law is king. For as in absolute governments the king is law, so in free countries the law ought to be king, and there ought to be no other. But lest any ill should be used, or should afterwards arise, let the crown, at the conclusion of the ceremony, be demolished and scattered among the people whose right it is. Summarizing that is that, hey, all the power should be in the people. The people choose the law. They make that social contract, so they should follow it, and that is right. Whereas a king is just one person, and if he tries to rule over everybody else, that's wrong. Second part here, a government of our own is our natural right. So to have a government is a natural right. That's new. You know, Locke talked about life, liberty, and freedom, and now this author has added a government as a natural right. And when a man seriously reflects on the precariousness of human affairs, he will become convinced that it is infinitely wiser and safer to form a constitution, which is another form of social contract, constitution, of our own in a cool, deliberate manner, while we have it in our power, than to trust such an interesting event to time and chance. This is Thomas Paine. He wrote this in a booklet called Common Sense that outsold the Bible for about a year. At the time this is written in America, there's over 1 million people in America. He sold over 400,000 copies of this book, Common Sense. Not all of those were in America, but this was extremely widely read. This is the best-selling book or pamphlet in America, and probably the best-selling book in the world that year. Okay? And we've already kind of summarized it you can see how he's hearkening back to some of these ideas, primarily of Locke. So let's do one more, and then we'll be done here. Whenever we speak of taxes among Englishmen, let us therefore speak of them with reference to the principles on which and the intentions with which they have been established. This will give certainty to our expression and safety to our conduct. Okay, safety to our conduct, that's talking about liberty, and safety is part of life. So he's hearkening back to John Locke too. But if we have in view the liberty of these colonies, we proceed in any other course, we pursue a Juno. Indeed, we shall only catch a cloud. In the national parliamentary sense, insisted on, the word tax was certainly understood by the Congress of New York, whose resolves may be said to form the American Bill of Rights. The third, fourth, fifth, and sixth resolves are thus expressed. That it is inseparably essential to the freedom of a people and the undoubted right of Englishmen that no tax be imposed on them without their own consent, given personally or by their representatives. Again, that's that consent. That harkens back to John Locke. We have to consent to the government. And in this case, they're talking about how the government taxes. That the people of the colonies are not, and from their local circumstances, cannot be represented in the House of Commons in Great Britain. So there he's saying, hey, we're America. There's nobody speaking for us in England. That the only representatives of the people of the colonies are the persons chose therein by themselves, and that no taxes ever have been or can constitutionally be imposed on them but by their respective legislators. So here he's saying, we've consented to these local governments. We've consented that they could have the power to tax us, but we've given no consent to these other governments clear across the ocean in England. And finally, that also applies to the crown, being free gifts of the people. It is unreasonable and inconsistent with the principles and spirit of the British Constitution for the people of Great Britain to grant His Majesty the property of the colonies. So now we're hearkening back to that property talked about by John Locke. If it's the property of the colonies, then they've never consented for the king to take it. All right, so there's your summary of that for lesson 2. You're going to fill out your little sheet about a social contract that you're in, and that'll be your work to make sure you understand this assignment. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.